Chapter 1: The Lawnmower. Grant Breenan wasn't thinking about his wife. He was thinking about the oil filter. Specifically, he was wondering whether he still had a spare gasket in the cabinet above the workbench. The one Sandy had once tried to reorganize, and then wisely abandoned when she realized it obeyed a logic she didn't speak fluently. The lawnmower had been running a little louder than usual. Nothing alarming. Just a change in tone that told him it had reached the stage of life where small acts of maintenance mattered more than ever. He liked machines that way. They didn't complain. They gave you signals, and if you listened, you could keep them going for a long time. The voices from the backyard washed over him without meaning at first. Ice clinked. Someone laughed loudly enough to override everyone else. Then another voice dove straight across it. Seamless, like a practiced relay. Grant smiled faintly despite himself. He'd never understand how Sandy and her friends managed to talk like that. 5 streams at once, no collisions, perfect comprehension. Chaos, but functional. He set the rake back on its hook and closed the shed door halfway. "I mean, Grant's great," someone said, drawing out the word great in a way that immediately nullified it. Another laugh followed. Softer. Then Sandy's voice, warm and careless. "He's very dependable." Grant froze, not dramatically, just a pause. Dependable was fine. Dependable was good. He prided himself on dependable. "What else do you need, honestly?" Kelly, he thought it was Kelly, added. "The man's basically an ATM with a tool belt." The laughter this time was sharper. It came with agreement, with recognition. Grant's name surfaced again, bobbing in the conversation like a buoy, and with it, more amusement. Comments layered over one another. None of them cruel enough to demand confrontation. All of them dismissive enough to wound. What hurt wasn't the joke itself. It was the sound that joined the laughter a beat later. Kylie. His daughter's laugh wasn't like Sandy's. It was newer, higher, still unpolished. Grant had taught her to ride a bike. Taught her how to hold a hammer without smashing her fingers. He still remembered the exact weight of her asleep on his chest when she was 4. That laugh, easy, unthinking, landed somewhere he didn't have armor. He didn't plan to walk toward the gazebo. His feet just did it. The steps creaked under his weight, and the laughter died mid-note, like someone had reached over and shut off the music. Smiles lingered, confused by the sudden silence, like party decorations after the guests have gone home. Grant stood there, oil rag still in his hand. No one spoke. He looked at Sandy first. She was flushed, caught between surprise and irritation. Kylie stared at her glass. The friends sat too straight. "I've given this family everything," Grant said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "The house you live in, the clothes you wear, the phone you can't seem to put down." His gaze flicked briefly to Kylie. Not accusing, just factual. "The food you eat while you sit here teaching our daughter how to disrespect her father." Sandy opened her mouth. "That ends now," he said calmly. Final. He turned his head to the women beside her. "You're no longer welcome in my home. Please leave." The moment stretched, absurd and polite. No one quite knew how to stand up fast enough. Sandy's chair scraped back. "You can't just tell my friends to leave." Grant met her eyes and didn't soften. "Respect is a funny thing," he said. "You can respect someone you hate, but you can't love someone you don't." The friends hovered, purses in hand. "If you think it's okay to teach our daughter to value me only for what my wallet brings," he continued, "then we have catastrophically different ideas of what love and commitment are." Sandy's face went pale beneath the blush. Kylie looked up now, eyes wide, offended, scared. "You've been standing on my shoulders and acting like you're flying," Grant said without venom. "You're about to find out what the real world looks like. I'm done being your ATM." A gasp. "Not Sandy. One of the friends. You have a roof over your head," he finished. "Clean water and food. That's what I'm responsible for. If you need anything else, get a job and buy it yourself." Silence swallowed the gazebo. Grant turned and walked back down the steps. He didn't wait for an answer. Inside the shed, the air smelled like grass and oil and old wood. He set the rag down, reached for the wrench and crouched beside the mower. His hands were steady. That surprised him a little. He'd expected adrenaline, rage, something cinematic. Instead, there was only clarity. The mower resisted at first, threads sticky with age, but gave way with a familiar bite. Grant exhaled slowly as the oil drained out, dark and tired. Behind him, through the open yard, he could hear the scrape of chairs, hurried goodbyes, the brittle politeness of embarrassment. The car door slammed. By the time Sandy came inside, Grant had already replaced the filter. Dinner was quiet. Kylie pushed food around her plate. Sandy didn't eat. No one apologized. No one yelled. Grant cleaned his hands at the sink and dried them carefully. Tomorrow he would reset the budget. He would cancel a few automatic expenses. Not out of spite, out of honesty. Marriage wasn't something you did once. It was something you did every day. And today, at least, he had finally shown up. Chapter 2: Quiet house. Loud thoughts. The house sounded different when the front gate clicked shut behind the last guest. It wasn't silence, exactly. The refrigerator hummed. The old clock above the mudroom ticked with the persistence of something that had survived too many batteries and refused to die out of spite. Somewhere, a pipe whispered as water cooled. But the atmosphere, Grant noticed this the way engineers notice vibrations, had shifted. Like a load-bearing wall had been exposed. Sandy stayed in the kitchen long after the tea glasses were rinsed and left upside down to dry. She wiped the counter twice, then a third time, moving objects that didn't need moving. Her mouth opened once, then closed. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then away. Grant didn't rescue her. He sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room with his laptop open, a yellow legal pad beside it. Not dramatically, not as a show, simply because this was where he thought best. Budgets behaved when you engaged them calmly. Kylie hovered at the edge of the room like a wrong answer waiting to be called on. "This is ridiculous," Sandy finally said, too loud for the size of the room. "You humiliated me." Grant didn't look up. "No, I stopped something. That's not the same thing." "It is to me." Kylie crossed her arms. "So you just decided we don't get a say now?" Grant's fingers paused over the keys. He turned in his chair. Not sharply, not slowly. Precisely the speed required to show he was listening. "You had a say," he said. "You used it." Her cheeks flushed. "I was joking. You were agreeing. That's not..." "Kylie." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lower it either. "You don't get to borrow other people's disrespect and pretend it's weightless." She blinked at him, offended. Hurt, 15 and unaccustomed to gravity. Sandy stepped between them instinctively. "She's a kid. She's our kid," Grant said. "Which means we don't teach her that people are disposable once they've paid enough." Sandy laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You're acting like I plotted this." "I'm acting like it happened." The laugh died. She looked suddenly tired. Older, though Grant immediately dismissed the thought. They were the same age. 13 days apart. Sandy loved to remind him she was older first. Liked to joke she'd arrived and been unimpressed. Now she sat and folded her hands together. "So what?" she said. "You're punishing us?" Grant finally looked away from the screen. Not in retreat, but completion. He closed the laptop gently. "I'm stopping," he said. "There's a difference." "From what?" Kylie snapped. "From being taken for granted." Silence settled again, heavier now. Grant stood and crossed the room, unhurried. He reached the hallway closet and took out the spare file box he'd been meaning to organize for months. He set it on the dining table and slid across a thin stack of folders. "Starting tomorrow," he said, "I cover essentials. Mortgage, utilities, food, insurance, anything that keeps us safe." Sandy straightened. "And the rest?" "The rest requires income." Her mouth compressed. "You can't just..." "I can," he said. "I have. And I am." Kylie let out a strained, incredulous sound. "So you're just..." "What, cutting us off?" Grant met her gaze. "I'm teaching you what money actually is. It's not a personality. It's effort, time, and trade-offs. And lately, I've been the only one trading." Sandy stood abruptly, chair legs scraping. "This is control." Grant shook his head once. "This is boundaries." She paced, hands knotted, emotions chasing each other too fast to catch. Anger flashed, then fear, then something uglier, recognition. "You never said anything," she accused. "I said it every time I stayed late," Grant replied. "Every time I passed on something I wanted. Every time I chose safe over exciting because exciting scares families. That was your choice, and you benefited from it." Sandy stopped pacing. "You don't even care if I stay married to you." The accusation hung there, raw. Grant considered it carefully. "I care very much. I just won't beg for consent to be respected." Kylie shoved her chair back and fled to her room, door closing harder than necessary but not slamming. Grant counted it as progress. Sandy sank back down, all fight temporarily gone. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Grant thought of the gazebo, of laughter, of the way something inside him had gone brittle. "I want you to look at me," he said, "and see more than what makes your life easier. I want you to figure out when that stopped happening. And if it doesn't come back?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then we'll still be decent," he said finally. "We'll still do the work. That's what vows are for." She covered her face with her hands. That night, Grant slept lightly. Not out of fear, out of recalibration. At midnight he got up, padded to the kitchen in socks, and made tea. He sat at the table alone, steam curling up between his hands, and allowed himself to feel the weight of it. He loved them. That hadn't changed. But love without alignment was just endurance. By morning, Sandy was gone when he woke. A note sat on the counter in her familiar slanted script. "Went out. Back later." Grant read it once and left it there. He drove Kylie to school in silence. At drop-off she paused, hand on the door. "Dad," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Yes." "You embarrassed Mom." Grant nodded. That happens sometimes when people notice truth. She didn't like the answer, but she nodded anyway and got out. Grant watched her walk toward the building, shoulders tight, and felt the familiar ache of parenting. A dull, constant pressure that meant something mattered. At work, everything made sense again. Plans aligned. Problems behaved. People listened. But on his lunch break, Alone in his truck, Grant stared at the steering wheel longer than necessary. Home was still home. It was just louder now, even when no one was speaking. Chapter 3. The Cost of Absence. Sandy didn't intend to drive for nearly an hour. She told herself she was just going to the grocery store, out of habit more than need, but missed the turn without noticing. The radio murmured at a volume that suggested company without conversation. By the time she glanced at the street signs, she was already halfway down a boulevard she hadn't driven in years, past a strip mall that used to house a yoga studio, and now sold discount mattresses with banners screaming about urgency. She pulled into a parking lot and shut off the engine. The quiet inside the car felt different than the quiet at home. Less accusing. More optional. For 15 years, Sandy's days had been shaped around absence. Grant leaving early, coming home steady and tired. Kylie growing taller and louder and more complex. Sandy had filled the spaces between with usefulness. Pediatric appointments. Packed lunches. School forms signed in ink that never ran out because she always replaced the pen before it could fail. At some point, the structure had become invisible. She sat there now, hands idle on the steering wheel, and realized she had no idea what she wanted to do next. Not what she should do, what she wanted. The question felt embarrassingly large. When she finally drove home, the house was empty. Grant's truck wasn't in the driveway. Kylie wouldn't be back until late afternoon. Sandy walked through each room as if inventorying a place she might someday have to leave voluntarily. The gazebo glinted in the yard, sun catching on the varnish Grant had reapplied last summer. She remembered the day he finished it. He'd wiped his hands on his jeans and asked what she thought. She'd said it was lovely, already planning who she'd invite over. She hadn't noticed how tired he looked. Inside, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Old resumes, a teaching certificate, laminated and slightly peeling at the corners. Notes from colleagues whose handwriting she barely recognized anymore. She sat at the table and cried. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough to mark the moment. Grant, meanwhile, was having the strangest day he'd had at work in months. Not because anything went wrong, because everything went right. He walked into the office and was greeted by name. A junior engineer asked his opinion before acting. Two departments aligned on a plan without bickering. He noticed it halfway through the morning and nearly laughed at himself for it. Respect behaved like that. Quiet. Consistent. Hard to notice until it went missing somewhere else. At lunch, he ate with a group he usually avoided, pleasant enough people, just too quick with talk about promotions and hypotheticals. Today, though, the banter landed lighter. Still in the suburbs? Someone asked. Grant nodded. For now. Must be nice, another said. Stability. Grant smiled but didn't answer. Stability, he'd learned, required occasional defiance just to remain upright. When he got home, Sandy wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't folding laundry, wasn't moving things that didn't need moving. She sat at the dining table with papers spread out around her. Grant paused, briefcase still in hand. I'm not apologizing yet, she said immediately, eyes still on the page. If that's what you're waiting for. I wasn't, Grant replied. He set the briefcase down. What's all this? She gestured vaguely. My life, apparently. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat. She looked older up close, not in years but in attention. Something awake that had been dormant. I forgot how much I liked teaching, she said. I was good at it. You always were. I stopped because it made sense. Her voice hardened slightly. But sense can make things small without meaning to. Grant nodded once. That happens. She looked up. You really meant it. About the money. Yes. About respect. About the end of pretending. He didn't say it again. Sandy inhaled slowly, then exhaled. I made you infrastructure. Grant didn't correct her. I talked about you like, you weren't even there, she continued. Like you were a feature of the house. Electricity. Something that just worked. He watched her carefully. Not to catch her in remorse, but to see if it settled into understanding. That's the cost of absence, she said suddenly. Not you being gone. You being invisible. Grant leaned back. I didn't know how to change that without being someone else. I didn't notice until now. Kylie arrived home an hour later with headphones clamped on, expression carved into practiced indifference. She froze when she saw both parents at the table. What? She said, defensive already. Am I in trouble? Grant shook his head. Sit. She did, sulking. Sandy studied her daughter, really looked, and felt something in her chest ache. We messed up, Sandy said. Your father and I. We let things slide because they were comfortable. Kylie scoffed. So this is about money. No, Grant said. It's about weight. Kylie frowned. What? You laughed at me, he said gently. Not with me. About me. That told me something. Her eyes darted. I didn't mean. I know, he said. That's the problem. Silence followed, thick but not hostile. Respect, Sandy added quietly, isn't automatic. You don't get it just because someone's in the room. Kylie swallowed. I didn't think it mattered. Grant softened then, just a little. It always matters. That night, Sandy drafted an email she never sent. then rewrote it into something braver. She searched job listings and felt the unfamiliar tug of nerves mixed with interest. Grant adjusted the budget with steady hands and left the door open, not as an invitation but as an option. Upstairs, Kylie stared at her phone for a long time before setting it face down and opening a book she hadn't finished for weeks. The house didn't fix itself that day, but something important shifted. Absence had a cost, so did presence. Chapter 4. Kylie learns gravity. Kylie learned the word consequence was heavier than it looked. At 15, she'd thought it was mostly theoretical, a vocabulary word teachers liked, something adults waved around to sound serious. You did something, something else happened. End of story. The consequences, it turned out, had shape. Massachusetts. They took up room. Started small. Her allowance didn't refresh. She noticed it Sunday night, sitting cross-legged on her bed, phone glowing in her hands as she scrolled through a shopping app with the practiced hope of someone who expected yes. She refreshed once, then again, then frowned and checked the calendar. She walked downstairs barefoot. "Dad?" she called. Grant was at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes and a mug that smelled like coffee he hadn't finished because he'd made it hours ago. He looked up immediately. "What's up?" "My money didn't come through." Grant nodded. "That's right. That's it." She waited for more. An explanation. Correction. Anything that implied a mistake. "That's it." Her voice sharpened. "You said essentials. My allowance is not essential," Grant finished calmly. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. She stood there in a standoff she hadn't prepared for. "So I just don't get anything now?" "You get what you earn," Grant said. "Like everyone else. I'm 15. And you're capable." That answer followed her back upstairs, sticky and annoying. Capable felt like a trick word adults used when they wanted you to stop complaining. School that week was worse. Her friends complained about teachers and assignments and parents like usual, but Kylie found herself listening differently, tracking who complained about what, whose parents bought things without comment, whose parents asked questions first. At lunch, Marissa laughed about her dad grounding her and added, "Whatever, he's overreacting." Normally Kylie would have laughed too. Instead, the words overreacting rang hollow. That afternoon, she forgot a permission slip for a field trip, a small thing usually fixed with an apology and a hurried email. When the teacher said she'd need to stay back, Kylie felt something ugly twist in her chest. At home, she stood in the doorway to the living room while Grant read the mail. "I didn't get to go," she said. Grant looked up. "Why not?" "I forgot a form." He nodded. "That happens." She waited for him to say more, to offer to call, to fix it retroactively through parental influence. He didn't. "So?" she pressed. "So you missed it." Her voice spiked. "You're not even going to be mad?" Grant tilted his head. "Do you want me to be?" "No," she snapped. Then quieter. "I just thought you'd do something." "Why?" The question was simple. Too simple. Kylie had no answer she liked. Upstairs, she lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling, phone abandoned on her desk like it had personally betrayed her. The world hadn't ended. Nothing dramatic had happened. And that was somehow worse. Things were just heavier. Meanwhile, Sandy was navigating a kind of vertigo she hadn't expected. She'd had 2 interviews lined up by Wednesday. Nothing glamorous, nothing permanent. But walking into those buildings felt like stepping onto solid ground after years on a floating dock. The first interviewer asked why she'd left her career. "For my family," Sandy said automatically. "And now?" the woman asked. Sandy paused. "Because I want to be someone my daughter watches closely." That answer surprised both of them. When she came home flushed and energized, she found Grant sanding a stubborn edge on the gazebo railing. She stopped and watched him without announcing herself. He noticed anyway. "How'd it go?" he asked without turning. "I remembered how to shake hands like I mean it," she said. "That felt nice." Grant smiled faintly. "It usually does." She lingered, then said, "I told Kylie she can do her own laundry now." Grant lifted an eyebrow. "Brave." "She rolled her eyes," Sandy added, then asked how the machine works. Grant set the sander down and turned. "That counts as progress." Kylie did the laundry badly. She mixed colors, forgot detergent, shrunk a shirt she loved and had to sit on her bed afterward and process the loss like it was a pet. When she tried to complain, Sandy just said, "That's how you learn." "And how do you know?" Kylie shot back. Sandy met her gaze steadily. "Experience." That shut her up. The real test came on Friday. There was a movie everyone was seeing, everyone in Kylie's world, which was to say, the 3 people whose opinions currently mattered more than oxygen. Tickets were $20. Snacks were extra. She stood in the kitchen, rehearsing. "Dad," she said finally. Grant looked up from the dish rack. "Yes. Can I borrow money?" "How much?" "Like 40. "For what?" She hesitated. Old habits tugged. Reflex lies crowded the doorway. "A movie." Grant nodded. "Okay. How will you pay it back?" Her stomach sank. "I thought, you know." "I know you thought something," he said carefully. "I'm asking what your plan is." She stared at the floor. "I could help more around the house?" Grant shook his head. That's everyone's job. Then what? He dried his hands. What do you think people do when they want something they don't have money for? They work, she muttered. Yes. Her shoulders slumped. I don't have a job. You have time, she groaned. Dad, I'll loan you the money, he said evenly. But you're paying it back. With what? Figure it out. She stormed off. That night, she didn't go to the movie. Instead, she babysat for the neighbors. Kids she'd always dismissed as loud and sticky and pointless distraction. 2 hours in, with one crying and the other asking if dinosaurs had feelings, Kylie felt something shift. She earned $45. She handed 20 of it to Grant the next morning without ceremony. For the movie, she said. Grant accepted it. Thank you. She waited. That's it? She asked. That's it. No lecture. No praise. No joke. Just weight removed, exactly equal to the effort applied. Kylie went upstairs afterward and sat on her bed, staring again at the ceiling. But this time the thoughts were different. Not resentful. Measured. Downstairs, Sandy watched her go and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Grant returned to the gazebo later that afternoon and finished sanding the railing smooth. Gravity, he knew, wasn't cruel. It was honest. And if you learned to stand within it early, it stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like balance. Chapter 5. Work is not an escape. Grant hadn't meant to stay late. That was the kind of thing people said when they absolutely meant to, when quiet offices made more sense than noisy homes, when fluorescent lights felt forgiving because they asked nothing personal. Grant didn't use work that way. Work was a place where effort mapped cleanly to outcome. It wasn't refuge. It was function, which was why the email caught him off guard. It arrived at 4:47 p.m., tucked between a facilities update and a reminder about parking permits. The subject line was unassuming to the point of stealth. Regional Infrastructure Review Opportunity. Grant opened it, expecting another committee request he'd politely decline. Instead, it was an invitation. Not casual. Not vague. A formal request from the city's regional planning office asking if he'd be willing to lead a 6-month interdepartmental assessment. Transport, utilities, long-term aging assets. The kind of role he'd been tapped for before and had turned down without discussion because it came with travel, uncertainty, late nights. The kind he'd wanted more than he'd admitted. He read it twice, then once more, slower. Across the aisle, Nina glanced up over her monitor. You okay? You're making your problem-solving face. I'm reading an email, Grant said. That tracks, she replied. It's the eyebrows. He snorted despite himself. Nina was newer than Grant by a decade but had strong instincts and an unholy talent for spotting inefficiency. She was also immune to hierarchy, which made conversations refreshingly free of subtext. What is it? She asked. An opportunity, he said, choosing the word carefully. That complicates things. She leaned back in her chair. Those are the interesting kind. Not always, she shrugged. Nothing worth doing goes out of its way to be convenient. Grant considered that. You've been here 2 years. Give it time. She smiled. I plan to. At 5:30, Grant shut down his computer and stood. The email sat flagged, unresolved. Normally he'd have dismissed it by now with a polite decline and an explanation he'd rehearsed so many times it felt pre-written. This time he didn't. The drive home was uneventful. Late afternoon traffic, familiar term. But Grant noticed he wasn't replaying conversations the way he usually did lately. He was imagining logistics, schedules, trade-offs. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment before getting out. The house was alive tonight. Sandy was on the phone in the kitchen, her back to him, posture animated. She laughed at something, not brittle, not defensive. Real. Kylie was at the table sorting laundry into piles that suggested she was beginning to understand color theory through lived experience. Grant hung his keys and listened. Yes, I can start part-time, Sandy said into the phone. No, I understand. Short-term is fine. She turned then, saw Grant, and held up a finger. 1 second. He nodded and continued into the living room. When Sandy hung up, she stayed where she was, watching him. I got it, she said. Got what? The job. Temporary. 2 mornings a week to start. There was pride there. And nerves. They said my references were solid. They are, Grant said without hesitation. She smiled, small but genuine. Thanks. Kylie looked up from the laundry. I ruined another shirt. Sandy grimaced. Grant deadpanned. You're building character. Kylie groaned. I hate your character. Grant took that as a compliment. Dinner was simple, leftovers repurposed into something resembling ambition. Conversation skirted gently around heavy topics without avoiding them entirely. Sandy asked about Grant's day. How was work? She asked, casual but attentive. Good, he said. Then, after a beat, complicated. Her fork paused midair. What kind of complicated? He considered deflecting. Old instinct. He didn't. I got asked to lead a regional project, he said. 6 months. Bigger scope. More exposure. Oh, Sandy processed that. Is that good? It is, Grant said. It's also disruptive. Kylie perked up. Does that mean we have to move? No, Grant said. It means I might not be home as early sometimes. That mattered. Sandy nodded slowly. Would you want to do it? The question surprised him. Not because it was asked, but because it was asked without assumption. Yes, he said. I think I would. And before? She asked quietly. Before, it wasn't worth the risk. The table absorbed that. Kylie returned to her laundry, expression thoughtful. Sandy reached for her water glass and took a sip she didn't seem to need. Well, she said eventually, we should talk about it. Grant nodded. We should. Not tonight. Not reactively. That mattered too. Later, when the house settled and Kylie retreated to her room, Grant stood on the back porch. The gazebo loomed, familiar and changed by context rather than structure. Sandy joined him, wrapping a sweater around herself. You're not using this as an exit, she said plainly. Grant turned to her. No. She studied his face. I needed to ask. I know. They stood in silence for a few moments, not uncomfortable, just unfilled. At the interview today, Sandy said, they asked how I plan to manage my household responsibilities. Grant raised an eyebrow. I told them I have a partner, she continued. Not a provider. Not support. She swallowed. A partner. Grant felt something loosen, not fully, but enough to register. That's accurate, he said. She nodded. I'm trying to be. At work the next day, Grant was walking toward the conference room when his department head fell into step beside him. You saw the email, she said without preamble. I did. You didn't immediately say no, she observed. Also true. She smiled. We noticed. Grant chuckled ruefully. I'm reconsidering my life choices. Don't rush me. She laughed. Take the weekend. But for what it's worth, you were our first pick. Last time too. After she walked away, Nina appeared at his elbow like she'd been summoned by the concept of overhearing. I knew it, she said. Eyebrows. Grant sighed. If I take this thing, you're stuck with extra responsibilities. Her smile widened. Oh no. Growth. You're enjoying this. I am, she agreed. Then, more seriously, you deserve work that notices you. That stuck with him. That night, Grant lay awake. Not restless, but active. Sandy slept beside him, breathing even. The house felt steadier lately. Not fixed, but responsive. Work wasn't an escape. Neither was home. For the first time in a while, the question wasn't which one demanded more of him, but whether he could finally choose himself without costing the people he loved. That, he realized, was a different kind of responsibility, and one he was ready to examine honestly. Chapter 6. Sandy gets a job. Sandy's first shift felt like the first day of school. If school came with a name badge and the quiet judgment of better chairs. The building was smaller than she remembered. Clean but compressed, hallways not quite wide enough to pass without negotiation. She arrived 15 minutes early, because arriving early felt like control, and stood in the lobby reading the mission statement printed on the wall until the words stopped rearranging themselves. Part-time education coordinator, the posting had said. Temporary. Flexible. Necessary. Her badge read as Breenan, which startled her enough that she touched it twice, just to confirm it was real and still hers. The woman who trained her, Denise, was 10 years younger and aggressively friendly in the way of someone who had learned kindness as a defense. She spoke in complete sentences, moved quickly, and never once apologized for taking up space. You remember how to use the system? Denise asked. Sandy nodded, then corrected herself. I remember how to learn how to use the system. Denise grinned. Perfect. That's most of it. The work itself wasn't difficult. Scheduling. Emails. Small problems that needed small solutions instead of emotional processing. There was a dopamine hit she hadn't felt in years. Finish a task, check it off, move on. At lunch, she sat alone with her sandwich and realized no one would interrupt her. No one needed anything. No one would ask her opinion unless she volunteered it. The thought should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt earned. At home, the ripple effects were immediate. Dinner didn't happen by accident anymore. Sandy learned the value of crockpots. Kylie learned how to read package instructions past the fourth step. Grant learned that Sandy swore under her breath when spreadsheets didn't behave. On Wednesday evening, Sandy walked in 10 minutes late and dropped her bag by the door instead of hanging it up. She froze, waiting for the reflexive guilt that used to arrive fully formed. Didn't. Grant looked up from the stove. Traffic. She nodded. And a printer that hates me. He handed her a spoon. Taste this. She did. More salt. He added it without comment. Later that night, Sandy sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, utterly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with emotional depletion. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kelly, one of the gazebo friends. Missed you today. Want to do brunch Friday? Sandy stared at it longer than necessary. The brunches hadn't stopped. Invitations still came. But the tone had shifted, less easy assumption, more testing the ground. She typed, deleted, retyped. Can't Friday. Working. Maybe another time. The reply came quickly. Wow, look at you. It wasn't a compliment. Sandy set the phone down and surprised herself by not picking it back up. Grant, for his part, discovered that Sandy's absence reshuffled things he'd taken for granted without noticing he'd done so. The dishwasher ran at a different time. The usual rhythm of the house moved off beat, and he had to decide whether to adjust or insist on tempo. He adjusted. On Thursday, he came home to find Kylie at the counter counting bills. "What's this?" he asked. "Babysitting money," she said. "I'm splitting it." "Why?" She didn't look up. "Because Mom's working and I use a lot of stuff." Grant didn't comment. He poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Watching her struggle with math, she technically knew and emotionally resisted. When Sandy got home, she found Kylie had folded her own laundry. Poorly, but completely. Sandy said nothing. She hugged her daughter instead, brief and awkward and sincere. Friday evening brought the inevitable collision. Grant was reviewing notes for the regional project. Still flagged, still undecided. When Sandy came in and dropped her bag a little too hard. "Okay," she said. "I'm mad now." Grant closed the notebook. "About everything," she admitted. "And one specific thing." He gestured toward the chair. "Floor's open. They treat me like I'm new," she said, pacing. "Like I haven't lived a life. Like I should be grateful for the opportunity to be marginally useful." Grant listened. He didn't interrupt. He recognized the tone. Not anger, but disorientation. "And then," she continued, "Denise asked if I could cover an extra shift next week. And I said yes," Sandy said, without checking, like it was normal. Grant smiled faintly. "It is. I know." She sank into the chair. "That's what's messing with me." He nodded. "Identity lag." She laughed weakly. "Is that a real term?" "It is now." Sandy rubbed her temples. "I used to think staying home meant I was irreplaceable." Grant didn't correct her. "I wasn't," she said quietly. "I was essential. There's a difference." Grant reached across the table not to console but to connect. She let him. That weekend, Sandy ran into Kelly at the grocery store. Kelly looked her up and down. "So," she said lightly, "you're working now?" "Yes. How's that going?" Sandy considered the sugar display, the aisle lighting, the sound of carts. "It's good," she said honestly. "Hard." Kelly smiled thinly. "Grant making you?" Sandy met her gaze. "No." An awkward pause. "Well," Kelly said, forcing cheer, "don't disappear on us." Sandy nodded. "I won't. But things are going to look different." Kelly laughed as if that were a joke. It wasn't. That night, Grant and Sandy sat on the porch with two mismatched chairs because Sandy hadn't cared enough to coordinate yet. "You know," Sandy said, staring into the yard, "I used to talk about you like you were boring." Grant groaned. "Please don't." "I'm serious," she said. "Reliable. Predictable. I told myself that was the same as dull." Grant exhaled. And now I think boring is peace you don't recognize until you've had chaos." She smiled to herself. "Also, I think I confused comfort with entitlement." Grant nodded once. "That happens too." She turned to him. "About the project." He looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. "Ask. Do you think I should take it?" Sandy didn't answer immediately. "I think," she said slowly, "if you don't, it should be because you don't want it. Not because you're afraid something at home will break." Grant studied her face. The fatigue, the resolve, the absence of defensiveness. "And if it does?" he asked. "We fix it," she said simply. "Like adults who actually mean their vows." Grant felt a familiar steadiness return. Not comfort, but confidence. Inside, Kylie listened from the stairs without meaning to, absorbing the new language of her house. Negotiation, not assumption. Choice, not default. Sandy went back to work the next week with better shoes and a sharper sense of humor. Grant drafted a response to the regional office he didn't send yet, but didn't delete either. Nothing had reset magically, but momentum had shifted. And for the first time in years, Sandy wasn't standing on anyone's shoulders. She was standing on her own feet and discovering she liked the view. Chapter 7, Renegotiating Love. They didn't plan the conversation. That was important. It happened on a Tuesday night that hadn't asked to be memorable. Leftover pasta, a load of laundry humming upstairs, Kylie in her room with the door closed but not locked. The small domestic sounds of a house trying to remember how to breathe normally. Grant was rinsing dishes when Sandy spoke from behind him. "We can't keep orbiting this forever." He shut off the water and turned, drying his hands slowly. Not stalling, just recalibrating. "I agree." She leaned against the counter, arms folded not defensively but for balance. Work had given her that posture lately. Feet planted, shoulders square, eyes steady. "I need to know where we're actually going," she continued. "Not what we're avoiding." Grant nodded once. "Okay, let's do that." They sat at the table. The same table where budgets and resumes and quiet reckonings had been laid out over weeks. No tea this time. No ritual. Just presence. "I don't trust you yet," Grant said first. Sandy flinched but didn't interrupt. "I'm not saying that to punish you," he added. "I'm saying it because pretending otherwise would make me resentful, and I won't live in that." She absorbed that, breathing through it. Is it what I said? Or what I let Kylie hear? Both, he said. But mostly the second. She nodded. I taught her something ugly without realizing it. Grant's gaze softened just a fraction. We both taught her things by accident. Sandy swallowed. I need you to understand something too. I'm listening. When you stopped needing anything from me financially, she said slowly, I realized I'd been measuring my value by proximity, not contribution. Grant frowned. I never thought you didn't contribute. I know, she said gently. That's the problem. You assumed visible effort would cover missing engagement. And I let it. She drew a breath. I grew comfortable. And comfort turned into laziness of attention. That word landed hard, but honestly, Grant leaned back in his chair. I didn't speak up because I wasn't sure my needs were legitimate or just selfish. They were legitimate, Sandy said immediately, then paused. And I should have asked. Silence followed, not empty, but worked through. The kind that meant both people were translating new internal languages at the same time. Here's what I don't know yet, Grant said. If we rebuild, will you stay because you want me, or because this is the least disruptive option? Sandy blinked. The question hurt because it was exact. You don't have to answer now, he added. In fact, I'd prefer it if you didn't. She laughed weakly. That's terrifying. I know. She stared at the tabletop. I don't want a marriage that survives by inertia, she said finally. That's not fair to either of us. Grant smiled faintly. We agree again. She looked up. What do you need from me? Grant thought carefully. This wasn't a wish list. It was a contract. Agency, he said. Not permission. Engagement. Disagreement when it's real. And respect that doesn't vanish when I'm not useful. Sandy nodded. And I need partnership, she said. Not silent sacrifice. I need you to bring the hard things to me before they calcify. I can do that, Grant said. Then, after a beat, with time. That's fair. Another pause. I'm not asking you to forget, Sandy said. I don't deserve that. I'm not interested in forgetting, Grant replied. I'm interested in evidence. She nodded again. You'll get it. Upstairs, Kylie sat on her bed pretending not to listen. She knew better than to intrude, but she also knew when something important was being renegotiated below her. She didn't catch the words exactly, but she heard the tone. Later that night, Sandy knocked on Kylie's door. Can I come in? Kylie shrugged from her desk. You're already here. Sandy sat on the bed. Your dad and I talked. Kylie stiffened. Are you getting divorced? No. Oh. Kylie blinked. Are you okay? Sandy smiled sadly. We're being honest. It's louder than pretending. Kylie considered that. Dad's been different. So have you, Sandy said. Kylie huffed. Different how? More thoughtful, Sandy said. Less entitled. Kylie rolled her eyes. I hate that you notice now. I always noticed, Sandy said. I didn't always correct myself. Kylie picked at a thread on her sleeve. I didn't mean to hurt Dad. Sandy's voice softened. Intent matters. Impact matters more. Downstairs, Grant stood by the window, watching the porch light cast a cone into the dark. Sandy joined him a few minutes later. I talked to her, Sandy said. Grant nodded. I heard. They stood shoulder to shoulder. Not touching, not distant. About the project, Sandy added quietly. Grant smiled just a little. You know I haven't accepted yet. I know, she said. I just wanted you to know if you take it, we'll adapt. Not resentfully. That means more to me than you think. She leaned her head lightly against his arm. He didn't move away. This wasn't reconciliation. It was recalibration. Marriage, Grant thought, wasn't a feeling you checked for. It was a skill set you maintained. And tonight, finally, they were working from the same blueprint again. Not because love had saved them, but because respect had returned long enough to let love keep learning how to stand. Chapter 8 Marriage is a verb. Sunday mornings had developed a new texture. They were still slow. Coffee brewed too strong. The paper folded and refolded until Grant gave up and read it on his phone. But the emotional stiffness that used to sit in the house like an extra piece of furniture had eased. Not disappeared. Just repositioned. Sandy set a timer on her phone and slid a tray of cinnamon rolls into the oven. Store-bought. No one pretended otherwise. Grant noticed and appreciated the honesty. 20 minutes, she said. Which means 30. Grant smiled. I'll adjust expectations accordingly. Kylie wandered in, hair pulled back in a rushed bun that suggested she'd learned brevet Y was a skill, not laziness. She poured herself cereal without asking and took the last clean bowl without apologizing. But she also rinsed it afterward. Progress, Grant thought, came in mixed signals. I'm heading out after breakfast, Kylie said. Babysitting. Who? Sandy asked. The twins on Maple. And then I'm tutoring Ben after. Grant lifted an eyebrow. That's new. Kylie shrugged. Math isn't hard if you explain it like it's not magic. Sandy and Grant exchanged a glance. Grant didn't praise her. He'd learned better. He just said, text if something changes. She rolled her eyes, but she nodded. After breakfast, Grant stood at the counter with his laptop open. Not working exactly, but not working. Sandy watched him for a moment, then spoke. You're still thinking about the project. Grant closed the screen halfway. Yes. Okay. No sigh. No tension. I sent an email Thursday, he continued. Asked for details. And they replied. Is what I thought. Meaningful. Messy. Sandy leaned against the counter. Do you want to say yes? I'm not sure yet, Grant admitted. This time that answer feels true. Not avoidant. Good, she said. Then sit in it. He nodded. That's the plan. Sandy glanced at the clock. I've got a shift tomorrow morning. I know. You're okay. Yes. She smiled, a little crooked. I want to be clear. If something slips, I expect you to tell me. Grant met her eyes. Same. That exchange, simple, unornamented, felt heavier than a promise. Like a tool being handed across a workbench with the understanding it would be used properly. Later that afternoon, Sandy left for a walk. Not a chore errand. Not a grocery mission. Just a walk. Grant watched her go from the front window, noticing how she didn't rush. How she adjusted her pace to herself. He returned to his laptop and reopened the email. We believe your experience navigating competing priorities would be uniquely valuable. Grant exhaled. The vow he'd made all those years ago echoed. Not the words themselves, but the intention. Through good times and bad. Which everyone said, and few unpacked. Bad times weren't monsters. They were negotiations. He typed a response, not a yes, not a no. Interested. Requesting adjusted scope to allow predictable home presence 2 evenings per week. He hovered. Sent. On Monday morning, the house ran like a small operation finding its cadence. Sandy left first, keys jingling with the unfamiliar authority of someone going somewhere that mattered. Grant followed, packing his lunch instead of grabbing it. Small efficiencies that felt newly personal. Kylie left last, reminding them she needed a ride Tuesday because the bus schedule had changed. I checked, Grant said. I've got it. At work, the reply to his email came within the hour. Agreed. Your terms are reasonable. Grant stared at the screen, then leaned back in his chair, surprised by the absence of dread. Nina glanced over. You look like someone who won an argument they didn't expect to. I negotiated my life, Grant said. She grinned. Bold strategy. Terrifying. She nodded approvingly. Even better. That evening, Sandy came home flushed. Not with stress, but engagement. I forgot how satisfying it is to solve other people's problems for money, she said, kicking off her shoes. Grant smiled. That might be the least romantic sentence you've ever said. She laughed. I missed competence. They ate dinner at different times. Kylie wasn't back yet, and sat together anyway, content to share the room without orchestrating conversation. When Kylie did get home, she dropped a folded 20 on the counter. For gas, she said. Grant looked at it. For what? For tomorrow, she said. You're driving me to school. Grant blinked. You don't have to do that. I want to, Kylie said. Then, defensive, I use a lot of it. Sandy smiled into her water glass. That night, Grant lay awake. Not because he couldn't sleep, but because he didn't need to rush it. Sandy murmured something half-formed and shifted, her hand finding his arm without thinking. He didn't analyze it. He just stayed. On Saturday, the gazebo hosted a gathering again. Smaller. Intentional. No iced tea bar. No overlapping crosstalk that blurred into performance. Just Sandy's sister, her husband, and the kids chasing each other through the yard with the loud seriousness of young alliances. Grant grilled. Sandy set the table. Kylie moved between adults and children with surprising ease, explaining rules, retrieving cups, correcting gently instead of mocking. At one point, Sandy caught Grant watching. She's different, Sandy said quietly. He nodded. Growing hurts. She's learning where weight belongs, Sandy added. Near the end of the afternoon, Sandy's sister gestured at the gazebo. This is solid work, she said. Did you build it yourself? Grant nodded. Well, she said, it shows. Sandy didn't deflect. She didn't joke. She smiled and said, he's good at things that last. That night, after everything was cleaned and the yard reset to its ordinary order, Grant pulled a loose board on the gazebo railing back into place. He hadn't noticed it before. Not because he never came out here, but because he'd stopped being asked to notice. Sandy leaned in the doorway, watching. You didn't have to, she said. I know. He tightened the screw, then checked it once more. Marriage, he thought, wasn't romance plus time. It was attention, renewed. Inside, Kylie was laughing at something on her phone. Not at anyone. Not cruelly. Just amused. Grounded. Grant stood, wiped his hands, and joined his family indoors. Nothing was perfect, but the verbs were finally lining up with their meaning. Chapter 9, the gazebo rebuilt. The gazebo needed one more repair. Grant noticed it one evening in early spring. The light stretching longer now, the air carrying the tentative confidence of a season that hadn't yet decided to trust itself. The south railing had loosened again. Nothing structural, nothing dangerous. Just a screw that worked itself free over time. That felt about right. He fetched his tools without announcing the intention. Sandy watched from the kitchen window as he knelt, testing the board with his palm, adjusting his grip. She didn't come out right away. She'd learned that sometimes presence meant not interrupting momentum. Inside, Kylie was at the table with her laptop open, jotting notes for a history project she hadn't been reminded to start. She paused, then looked up. "Dad's fixing the gazebo again," she said, observational instead of accusatory. Sandy nodded. "Maintenance happens more often than people expect." Kylie considered that. "Is that a metaphor?" Sandy smiled. "I think so." When Grant finished tightening the screw, he stood and rolled his shoulders once, the way he did after a task that closed a mental loop. Sandy stepped outside then, carrying 2 mugs. "You look like you could use this," she said, handing one over. He accepted it. "You're learning my tells." "I'm paying attention," she replied. They leaned against the railing together. The yard was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from things being where they belonged. No performance. No audience. "I said yes," Grant said. Sandy didn't startle. "To the project." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "When does it start?" "Next month." "And you're comfortable with the boundaries?" "I am," he said. "More than I expected." She took a sip of her drink. "Good." They stood there, not touching but aligned, the way 2 people did when neither needed reassurance but both appreciated confirmation. Kylie drifted out a few minutes later, phone in hand. "I need to record video for my project," she said. "Can I use the gazebo?" Grant looked at her. "As long as you don't lean on the railing." She smirked. "I see you fixed it." "I noticed," he said evenly. She hesitated, then added, "Thanks." Grant nodded once. "You're welcome." Kylie positioned her phone carefully, rehearsed once under her breath, then began speaking. Not performative, not rushed. Grant watched without comment. "She's steadier lately," Sandy said quietly. "She feels the weight," Grant replied. "Doesn't resent it anymore." Sandy exhaled. "Neither do I." The video ended. Kylie checked it, frowned, re-recorded without anyone prompting her to improve it. Grant smiled faintly into his mug. Later that night, after the lights were off throughout the house and the ordinary sounds settled into their nocturnal arrangement, Sandy lay awake beside Grant. Not restless, just thoughtful. "Do you think we'll ever fully trust each other again?" she asked into the dark. Grant didn't answer right away. "I don't think trust comes back whole," he said finally. "I think it rebuilds in usable sections." "That sounds like something you'd say." He smiled. "It's how bridges last." She turned toward him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I want to keep choosing this," she said. "Not because it's familiar, because it's earned." Grant's hand found hers without ceremony. Same. Months later, the gazebo hosted another gathering. Not a showcase, not a reclaiming, just people. Conversation stayed linear. Laughter didn't depend on absence. When someone complimented the space, Sandy didn't deflect or take credit. "Grant built it," she said simply. "He does things properly." Grant met her eyes across the table. No grand gesture followed. None was needed. He knew now. Love didn't disappear when it was tested. Clarified. That evening, when the guests left and the yard returned to itself, Grant walked the perimeter once, habit, not obligation. Everything held. He went inside where Sandy and Kylie were arguing lightly about dishwasher placement and dinner plans. No one looked up right away. That was fine. Grant hung his jacket, took a breath, and joined the conversation exactly where he belonged. The gazebo stood behind them, not perfect, not new, just solid, just maintained, and finally, unmistakably, shared.